General, Mr. Lawrence Friedman, from Europe to Asia, Obama's pivot. So without much further ado, let me introduce Dr. Gino Strada, the founder of Emergency, albeit almost 20 years old, I believe. It's new to Hong Kong, quite recent addition to Asia. So Emergency is looking to expand its operations in Asia, but I won't take any more of your time, so I'll welcome Dr. Strada to
Good afternoon, and first of all, thanks to the FCC and to Custom for having us here today to illustrate our work that deals mainly with these issues, war, health, and human rights. Here we start with the technology that doesn't work properly. Come here. It's always the same story. I remember I gave my first speech in a medical conference was 35 years ago in Boston. At that time we used slides, and the lady was carrying my slide truck, just fell on the floor, and all the slides got mixed up. Okay. So we started from the end of the operation and...
Ok. La freccina in basso.
Okay.
Quella in basso.
Thank you. War, health, and human rights are very much related issues, particularly during the so-called post-war period. Post-war is probably not an exact definition, because after 1945, there were about 170 major conflicts around the world. So I don't think it's appropriate to call it the post-war. And what is very peculiar with war is that it triggers a spiral, not only dead, but maimed people and wounded and displaced people and poor and hungry, malnourished, and more deaths. Since 1946, 25 million people died because of direct consequences of war. On the other side, you have the military expenditures. These are the data given by the Stockholm International Study on Research and Peace Institute. The total military expenditures in 2000 summed up to $798 billion US dollars. And in 2011, we are at 1,738. Data from 2012 are not yet available, but presumably we are around 2,000 billion US dollars in 1 year. Just to try to figure out what means 1,700 billion US dollars in 1 year, we can say that this is what is available to live for the poorest 1/3 of the world population, which means 2 billion human beings. 4.7 billion US dollars per day are spent in militaries. And how could we stop this spiral of increasing world military expenditures and increasing world diseases and very poor social and economical conditions and famine and hunger and all those phenomena that come along with war? In our opinion, but fortunately we are not alone to think that way, building human rights is the only prophylaxis of war. This has been very well established by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that states that the recognition of the inherent equality and dignity and rights of every human being is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. And this statement goes back to December 1948. And in my opinion, not many countries have taken it seriously. And not many people understand that this recognition of basic equality is the only foundation of peace. Until we will be able to recognize this basic principle, we will live in a world of violence and war. Medicine, the second chapter of this speech. Well, I'm convinced that medicine can help to build peace, provided that medicine practices and builds human rights. And medicine has got this potential. But we have to choose which direction we have to take. Are we going for a human rights-based medicine or for a market-based medicine? And this is the big dilemma that we see every day in so-called developed countries, where medicine is becoming more and more a business that doesn't care about promoting health, but cares about promoting the disease, to sell more drugs, to provide more operations, to do unnecessary operations and dangerous operations in many instances when there is no need, because this creates profit anyhow. We have worked together with the ministries of health of different African countries, and we came up with a manifesto for a human rights-based medicine. This is the manifesto that has been signed by these 12 ministers of health of African countries. And basically, what this manifesto says is that we consider the right to health care as a basic and unalienable right belonging to each and every member of the human community, and that we think that it is necessary to implement health systems and projects devoted to preserve, extend, and improve the life of the people in need, and based on these principles: equality, quality, and social responsibility. What does this concept mean? Equality means that every human being has the right to be cured regardless his economic and social condition, gender, race, language, religion, and opinions. But also that the standards of health care set by the progress of medical knowledge must be delivered equally and without discrimination to all patients. In other terms, this principle is neglected every time we consider that the right to health care for us has to include forcibly all the sophisticated diagnosis and therapeutic means, whereas for an African citizen, for instance, the right to health care is confined into having a few antibiotics maybe about to expire. Equality does not only mean equality in rights, means also equal content of these rights. And the second principle is quality. It is stated in the manifesto, in order to strengthen and generate human, scientific, and material resources, quality systems must be based on communities' needs, up to date with the achievement of medical science, and not oriented, shaped, or determined by lobbies and corporations involved in the health industry. And again, social responsibilities. Governments should have the health and well-being of their citizens as their priority, and allocate adequate human and financial resources. The services provided by health systems and humanitarian projects in the health sector must be accessible to and free of charge for all. This might seem obvious and trivial. This is not the case. Many agencies, even humanitarian agencies, consider that health systems should be based on the principle of cost recovery, which means patients have to pay. And I think this is something very wrong from the social perspective, because sooner or later, we as human beings, we will all need health care. So the easiest solution to the problem is to make it good and free of charge for all. And discussing with these ministers of African countries, we came up with the idea of establishing a network of medical excellence in Africa, because we are convinced that medicine can be built from the top to the bottom and not the other way around. Centers of excellence are able to shape and determine different levels, structures, and to be the backbone of a health system. And therefore we came up with this idea of establishing an African network of medical excellence. Why in Africa? Because in Africa you still have dramatic indicators. Think of the mortality under 5 years. 10 million children die in the world before they are 5 years. And out of these 10 million, 5 million were living in Africa. So that's definitely the world priority number one. This is a picture taken from the operating room, one of the operating rooms of the Salam Center for Cardiac Surgery that was established by emergency in 2007 in Khartoum, in the outskirts of Khartoum, the capital of Sudan. We are talking about 10 centers of excellence, taking the Salam Center as a model. Centers in different disciplines, not only cardiac surgery, of course, but pediatrics, obstetrics and gynecology, oncology. There's not one hospital in Africa where you can have care, proper medical care if you have a cancer. 10 centers of excellence seems a very challenging and ambitious project. If we talk in terms of how much resources will it need, building, equipping, and running for 3 years, all these 10 hypothetical centers will cost around $300 million US dollars. It looks like a lot of money, almost impossible to collect it so that the project could be implemented. But $300 million US dollars is exactly the cost of 1 day of war in Afghanistan. You know, it would be enough that after 13 years of heavy fighting, they take a day off. I think they deserve it. And we would have 10 centers of excellence in Africa. I'm showing you this painting from the German George Grotz. This painting called The Survivor was painted in 1944, and he showed the effect of insisting in considering war as the solution of all problems and controversies. So again, we have to choose 1 day of war or 10 hospitals. And this is a dilemma which is still in front of us. Which reminds me of another dilemma that was put in writing in the so-called Einstein-Russell Manifesto back in 1955. The top scientists of the world posed a question to the world's government. Here then is the problem which we present to you, stark and dreadful and inescapable. Shall we put an end to the human race, or shall mankind renounce war? It hasn't been taken seriously by politicians. And they did not consider that this appeal came from the top world scientists, not only Einstein and Russell, many of the top scientists. Well, and this question is even more stringent today, because war is not anymore the one painted here by Francisco Goya, a war that was fought with carbines and pistols. Today we are in an era where nuclear weapons, 1 million times the bomb of Hiroshima, are available and ready to hit. Today we live in a world where people can be killed also by these flying toys, who are basically triggered by joysticks thousands of kilometers away. So the danger is much greater than the one at the time of George Grosz was painting his survival. Well, emergency has renounced war, actually, and emergency builds a human rights-based medicine which we consider the best or the only effective antidote to war. These are the list of the countries we have been working in since 1994. As you see, one of these countries at the top is Italy, which should not be included in this list, actually, but it is, because poverty and lack of medical care is a phenomenon that is heavily affecting more and more the Italian population as well. We have responded to this needs around the world by establishing surgical centers like these ones in Iraq or in Cambodia or in Kabul in Afghanistan, in Lashkargah. Lashkargah is in the Helmand province, where the biggest NATO campaign took place and is still ongoing. All these campaigns have been fought since years in the absence of every single journalist. No one has been there to inform the world population of what was happening. So the information that comes out of that NATO operation is basically what is written by military commanders. And again, other centers for victims of war and first aid posts, because it's not enough to have a treating center, you have to refer patients quickly and safely to the surgical center. And rehabilitation. Many of the war victims today are civilians, about 90% of the victims, and many of them have been injured by landmines, and which resulted in amputations or other motor disabilities. So part of the therapy, we think, is not just to provide surgery, but to provide a decent life, to make disabled and handicapped people to be, again, the breadwinner for their family. And that's why we organized cooperatives of former patients after teaching them a job with vocational training courses. And presently we have more than 300 cooperatives active in Iraq. They make their own living, and they can sustain properly their own families. And this is probably the end of the therapy. Then we realized, working in war zones, that there are not only the war wounded, there are many other people who have not been hit by a bullet or who didn't stood on a landmine, but were still victims of war. Children who cannot have any proper medical care anymore because hospital facilities have been disrupted. And these are some of our pediatric centers around the world, in Afghanistan, in Sierra Leone, in Sudan, in Central African Republic, in Port Sudan. And at the same time, women who cannot have a safe pregnancy anymore must be considered victims of war. That's why we open maternity centers like this one in Panjshir in Afghanistan, where you have over 3,000 newborn every year. And finally, I want to present you the Salam Center for Cardiac Surgery, the first center of excellence free of charge in Africa. I'm sorry to say that after 7 years, this is not only the first, it's the only center, and this is quite sad. One center free of charge for one continent. Obviously, it is nothing more than a seed, but a seed that I think is important, because in that center we have operated people coming from 25 different countries outside Sudan, and more we have requests to operate on small children and young teenagers. And this is a slide that summarizes our work since emergency was established in Milan in 1994. 5.2 million people treated worldwide. Is it a lot or is it nothing? Well, it's a lot for us because it's everything we were able to do, keeping so-called overhead or administrative costs always below 10% of our budget. And it's nothing compared to the needs, which are much, much bigger. Our staff includes about 270 international specialists and about 2,000 national staff in different countries. And this is what we have done. And this is what also brings us here to Hong Kong, trying to have our work better known and try to raise awareness and support for our activities. I feel confident that this can be achieved, and I'm appealing to you to help us and to give us your ideas and your suggestions on how to develop emergency, how to develop here emergency, how to get support, how to get funds, how to design new and future perspective. Thank you very much.
Thank you. First, let me rectify one omission. Actually, I wanted to mention that, and that should help with the fundraising a little bit, there's a book for sale at the exit for $200, so please feel free to pick one up. And we open the floor to questions. Sorry.
As a very experienced, thank you. As a very experienced surgeon, how do you maintain the work without just becoming completely emotionally overwhelmed by it?
Sorry, I didn't get exactly your question.
You obviously are an experienced surgeon in all of these countries, but how do you manage to maintain your work and also the people who work with you without becoming emotionally overwhelmed by it?
Well, you do become emotionally overwhelmed. Thanks. But there are ways to continue anyhow, because when you try to balance what you have given and what you have got back, you are always in credit. And even now, after 25 years, when I go to Afghanistan and happen to do surgery on a child victim of landmines, I feel nauseated. Although I've operated thousands of these patients, and every time it's the same. You feel like this. And then when maybe you see a kid a week later that is playing as he can in the garden and talking and smiling and laughing, I think you come out with a sensation that what you have done had to be done, that it was something just to do, and that gives you the strength to carry on.
How do you differentiate what emergency does from someone like Médecins Sans Frontières?
Well, I think basically we have a different approach and we do different things. I'm not aware that there is Médecins Sans Frontières surgical hospital. I know that they do send surgical teams to support local hospitals in many situations. And yes, this approach is different. I wouldn't advise to send an emergency surgical team in that particular situation in that public hospital to help as a main policy at least. It can happen sometimes, but in my opinion, it is much more effective and much more sustainable to establish a facility from A to Z and to run in according to your own policies and your own principles. And also in practical terms, I wouldn't go as a surgeon to do surgery in an operating room which is filthy. I wouldn't accept that. If I have to perform surgery, I have to do it in a way that is appropriate. In other terms, it's a matter of having probably a different approach to how medicine should be built. And I know that in this respect, many agencies think in a different way. We have been, for instance, very much criticized when we wanted to start the Center for Cardiac Surgery in Sudan by agencies who say, come on, why cardiac surgery? We should look after malaria and respiratory infections, which are obviously important things, and we do that as well. But I don't see a reason why we should limit ourselves to that kind of activity. I mean, imagine now that all of a sudden there is no more a center for cardiac surgery, I don't know, in Asia or in Hong Kong or in the United States. How the population would live that? How would they react? Would they consider it normal not to have a center of cardiac surgery? So why should an African consider it normal? And I'm convinced that medicine is better built that way. Many years ago, when medicine started to move from some sort of magics into a more scientific discipline, universities were established. The first university was established in Bologna in 1088. They did not establish a tent and a feeding center for displaced people. They established a university. And I think that we should learn from that lesson about how to build medicine in a sustainable way, but also in a scientifically valid and in a professional way. Everyone has, different policies and attitudes. I'm convinced that emergency is, in this respect, very innovative, and it has proved that it is possible to bring excellence in the surgical field in Africa. Then, from that moment onwards, if you don't want to do it, it's your choice. Don't tell me it's not possible. It is possible. If you prefer to do something else, very good. It could be equally important. But both things, in my opinion, have to get together.
Can you tell us more about how you established the Center for Excellence or Surgical Center in Sudan, as in the funding? Where did it come from and the story behind that? And where are you setting up next, or where would you like to?
Well, the story is that, we wanted a center where we could treat patients coming from different countries without any discrimination. To do that, we had to stay out of the emergency surgery, of course. It would be unrealistic to think of transporting from Congo polytrauma patients for 1,000 kilometers to Khartoum. And on the other side, we are dealing with cardiovascular diseases which are becoming the major killer in Africa. Even the WHO recognizes that probably in a few years, the leading cause of death in Africa will be cardiovascular diseases, not HIV. Although even now HIV is a slot machine. You mention the word HIV and the money comes in, bum, 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 bum. I hope this will change in the future. In Africa, you still have a tremendous disease, which is, we know very well because it was present all over the world 50, 60 years ago, which is the rheumatic heart disease. Virtually non-existent anymore in Europe or in the United States, if not in the new immigrants population. Where there is no health system, where prophylaxis is not possible on the general population, you still have this disease. And this disease is affecting at the moment some 18 to 20 million people in Africa. 5 million out of this are in need of surgical treatment, and they have one hospital where they have to go. So this gives you the magnitude of the problem. So we decided to work and establish this center. I must admit that the first step was to ask the Sudanese authorities to give us a land. We didn't want to buy a land, we wanted as a donation. And the governor of Khartoum gave us this beautiful piece of land just on the Blue Nile. And he told me 3 years later, when you asked me the land, I said, okay, I buy it and I give it to you. And he said, I was convinced that after 1 year or 2 years, you would come back and explain me why it was not possible to run this project, so you will give me back the land, which I was very much interested also as a businessman. And then I remember he came almost every Friday after the praying hours just to visit the site. And he saw that there were works ongoing, so he started to believe that we were serious. And eventually he became one of the greatest supporters of this project. This project that is costing around $10–11 million per year, because cardiac surgery is expensive. I mean, if you consider only consumable, every operation is costing around $2,000 US. Of course, you cannot reutilize the heart-lung machine, circuit, and so on. So the Sudanese government, the Ministry of Health, committed to contribute to the running cost with some $5 million US per year. They were not able to keep the promise, not fully at least, because of many things, including the separation of the South Sudan and the big changes in the exchange rate between the US dollar and the Sudanese pound. But still, I mean, they are supporting, I would say, with 3 million, something like this last year, and this year we should get much, much closer to the 5 millions, which will cover nearly 50% of the running cost. The rest is provided by emergencies, private donations. What is interesting, I think, is that the Sudanese authorities decide to contribute to the expenses for all patients who come to the Salam Center, not necessarily Sudanese. And so what happened was that they were in fact paying for the surgical care of patients coming from countries whose governments were at war with. And it's an interesting exercise to see patients from Sudan and from Chad, from Ethiopia, from Eritrea, and from Somalia, and from Uganda, all lying in nearby beds and sharing the same experience of high standard medicine delivered free of charge for all. I hope that we will find more private contributions to this operation. At the end, yes, it is expensive, but it's nothing compared to the cost of the same type of surgeries performed in Europe, for instance. And the difference, and the reason for the difference is very simple, is because we do practice a non-profit medicine. How much healthcare should cost? Well, in my opinion, it should cost as much as it is needed. Not $1 less, not $1 more. Instead, we see incredible things happening in our countries. I mean, the same type of surgery using the same type of disposable and consumable performed in Italy or performed in Sudan, I mean, the cost you have to multiply by 10, which is absolutely crazy. And that's why, I mean, we struggle against this idea of medicine as a business. And we want to stress again that medicine is an instrument to implement a human right, and therefore profit should not be allowed into this field.
I'm afraid we're getting very close to 2 o'clock now, so which normally ends this presentation. If there's one last question, short one, please. Thank you. Lady over there.
Dr. Strada, congratulations on your work. It's really inspiring. And I wanted to understand whether the disarmament approaches of countries like Japan with Section 4, I think it's called, are giving you hope in terms of the reallocation of funds towards non-profit medicine, and what your views and thoughts are on that specific to Japan, but then also more generally in terms of the world turning perhaps in the right direction to be able to spend money where it's most needed by humanity. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Well, I don't really think this is a question. I'm not so optimistic, actually. For the moment, I do not see a different approach. These figures that every year update us about the military expenditures do not show that the trend is changing. I hope that maybe a new trend will start not from government, but from other types of institutions like international donors or private donors, and that could serve as an example to governments about how to use their money. It would be great the day that 1% of the military expenditures would be reinvested in healthcare. Even 1% would make a huge difference. I hope we'll live long enough to see it.
Yeah, with that hopeful thought, I think we have to close today's presentation. I don't know if Dr. Strada is still going to be around for a few private questions, maybe after the... but thanks very much for coming. Please enjoy the Easter break, and we hope to welcome you here again in 1 week from now.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much.